Imagine for a moment a person who has suddenly awakened in a room full of sleeping people. He sees their closed eyes, hears their measured breathing, feels the density of collective sleep. He tries to wake them, to speak with them, but realizes they cannot hear him. They sleep while awake, living in an agreed illusion, and his awakening makes him a stranger among his own. Carl Jung called this the burden of consciousness, the moment when expanded awareness turns ordinary social interaction into unbearable energetic torture. Not from arrogance, but from the simple fact you have awakened and the world around you continues to sleep. This text is about why spiritually awakened people quietly disappear from society, why they find no place in the familiar world, and why this disappearance is not escape, but a necessary stage of soul transformation. The inner world of a person experiencing spiritual awakening resembles Earth after an earthquake. Familiar structures collapse, supports vanish, and in their place yawns a frightening void. What once seemed important, status, others' opinions, social roles, is now perceived as theatrical decoration. A person looks at their former life as at someone else's photograph where they played a role written by another. Analytical psychology explains this through the concept of the persona, the social mask we wear to meet society's expectations. Jung wrote that the persona is not our true self, but a compromise between individuality and collective demands. When the individuation process begins, the path to psychological wholeness, this mask starts to crack. A person suddenly realizes they have been pretending their entire life, agreeing, adapting, losing connection with their authentic essence. This realization is painful because it exposes years of lost time, energy invested in maintaining an illusion. The inner landscape changes radically. What seems solid becomes unstable, and what was ignored emerges into terrifying clarity. Before continuing this journey into depth, I want to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These simple actions help the algorithm show our content to more people who may be experiencing the same thing right now and need understanding. Your support allows me to create more material about deep psychology and spiritual transformations. Beneath the surface of consciousness work hidden mechanisms that most people are unaware of. The collective unconscious, as Jung called it, is the common psychic substrate unified for all humanity. It contains archetypes, universal patterns of experience, symbols, and images that repeat in myths, dreams, and cultures across different epochs. When a person begins to awaken spiritually, they gain access to these deep layers for the first time. They begin to see not only their personal problems, but also the collective patterns that govern mass consciousness. It's like watching a movie your entire life without knowing you're in a cinema, and then suddenly seeing the projector. You understand. It's all an illusion, a collective agreement, and most people live within this matrix without being aware of it. Few know that our perception of reality is formed not by objective facts, but by archetypal lenses through which we view the world. When these lenses become visible, real transformation begins. A person realizes that their fears, desires, and motivations are not entirely their own, but the result of collective forces' influence. This knowledge brings freedom, but also isolates, because those around continue to act unconsciously, driven by the same archetypes you already see through. How does this appear in real life? Imagine a woman who was always the life of the party, supported everyone, solved others' problems, sacrificed her own interests for others. She played the role of savior, an archetype familiar to many. But one day something inside clicked. Perhaps it was a moment of exhaustion, illness, or simply accumulated fatigue. She suddenly understood all this time she had been giving herself away because she feared rejection, feared that if she wasn't needed, she would be unnecessary. Her kindness was not genuine generosity, but a defense mechanism, a way to buy love and recognition. When she realized this, the process of withdrawal began. She stopped rushing to help at the first call, began saying no, protecting her boundaries. Friends and relatives reacted with bewilderment and hurt. What happened to the former kind, responsive woman? Why has she become so selfish? In reality, she didn't become selfish. She simply stopped playing a role. But for those around her, this transformation looked like betrayal because they were used to using her energy. This is the social dynamic of awakening. When you change, the world demands you remain the same. Why does this happen from the perspective of deep psychology? Jung spoke of a process he called meeting the shadow. The shadow is everything we have repressed from consciousness, all qualities, emotions, and desires we deemed unacceptable. For a child growing up in a family or society with rigid rules, certain parts of their personality become forbidden. Anger, sexuality, selfishness, ambition, fear, all of this is sent into the unconscious, forming the shadow. But this repressed part doesn't disappear. It continues to influence us from the darkness. Spiritual awakening often begins precisely with the shadow emerging into light. A person suddenly realizes their hidden motives, their envy, jealousy, anger they had suppressed for years. This shocks and frightens because it destroys the image of oneself as a good person. In psychology, this is called shadow integration, accepting the fact that we are not only light, but also darkness, not only good, but also potential evil. This doesn't mean we should encourage negative qualities, but recognizing their existence is mandatory. Only by accepting our shadow can we become whole. But this process repels those around us who still project their own shadow onto the external world, seeing evil only in others, but not in themselves. An awakened person sees this game and can no longer participate in it. There are hidden signs that indicate the individuation process has begun. Not everyone notices them because they are subtle and internal. The first sign is a change in time perception. A person begins to feel that old ways of living no longer work, that time flows differently, that some things once considered important now seem trivial. A sense of urgency appears. Something needs to change, otherwise life will pass by. The second signal is increased sensitivity to people's and places' energy. Those undergoing spiritual transformation often say they became able to sense falsehood, manipulation, hidden agendas with unusual acuity. A conversation that once seemed ordinary now provokes inner rejection because the person sees its superficiality. Few know that this is not simply caprice or snobbery. It's the work of expanded consciousness that can no longer ignore the energetic reality of interactions. The third sign is a change in one's social circle. Some people begin to disappear from life naturally, without conflicts or drama. The connection simply weakens. Conversations become strained. Meetings become rare. This doesn't mean someone is bad, just that the resonance has changed. Energetic frequencies no longer align, and attempts to maintain old connections become exhausting. The fourth signal is a desire for solitude that wasn't characteristic before. A person suddenly discovers they want to be alone, that silence has stopped frightening them and became desired. This is not depression or social phobia. It's the psyche's need for space to integrate new levels of awareness. How does all this affect relationships with those around us? Social dynamics change radically. People experiencing spiritual awakening often face misunderstanding and even hostility from loved ones. A partner says, "You've changed, you're different now." Parents accuse, "You've withdrawn, you don't love us anymore." Friends wonder, "Why don't you come to our gatherings anymore? Why aren't you interested in our conversations?" Jung wrote that individuation is always in some degree a path against the collective current. Society is held together by standardization, by everyone following common rules, values, behavioral norms. Someone who begins to walk their own path automatically becomes a threat to this system. Not because they do something bad, but simply because their existence reminds others that you can live differently. This creates discomfort. Those around project onto the awakening person their fears, their unexpressed individuality, their unspoken desire to also break free. But instead of recognizing this, they accuse him of selfishness, pride, aloofness. This is the uniqueness of the individuation personality type. It provokes in others simultaneous envy and condemnation, attraction and repulsion. Those who remain in the collective dream feel on an unconscious level that this person has exited the matrix, and this both intrigues and frightens them. Human psychology is equipped with powerful protective mechanisms that activate during spiritual transformation. This is not coincidence, but necessity. The process of meeting unconscious material, archetypes, the shadow is so intense that without protection, the psyche cannot endure it. Jung himself experienced this during his own psychological crisis, when he immersed himself in his own unconscious and encountered powerful archetypal images. He described it as a collision with living autonomous forces that could engulf consciousness. One protective mechanism is social isolation. The psyche intuitively knows it needs space, silence, absence of external stimuli to digest and integrate new experience. That's why a person begins to avoid noisy places, large groups, superficial conversations. This is not weakness, but the organism's wisdom protecting itself from overload. The second mechanism is dissociation from former identity. A person stops identifying with their social roles. I am not just a father, husband, worker. I am something greater. This dissociation can be perceived by those around as coldness or aloofness, but actually it's a temporary state necessary to build a new, more authentic identity. The third protective mechanism is increased introversion. Energy that once flowed outward now flows inward. This is an inevitable process because inner work requires enormous resources. Jung emphasized that individuation is not a one-time insight, but a lengthy, often painful process of inner alchemy, where the old personality dies so a new one can be born. In this lies a deep truth about human nature. We are not static. Our psyche is a living organism striving for wholeness. Jung called this the self, the central archetype representing the potential for full personality realization. The self is not the ego, not the small self concerned with survival and status. It's the greater self, which includes both consciousness and the unconscious, both shadow and light, both masculine and feminine principles. The individuation process is the path to the self, and it requires sacrifice. A person must sacrifice collective approval, the comfort of belonging to the crowd, the illusion of safety in the masses. In return, they receive something invaluable: authenticity. They become themselves, not a copy of others' expectations. The philosophical meaning of spiritual disappearance from society lies in the fact that it is not flight from the world, but a return to oneself. It is not misanthropy, but the necessity to create space for inner growth. Jung wrote that one who has stepped onto the path of individuation feels guilty for their withdrawal from collective values, but atones for this guilt by creating something valuable for society, be it art, knowledge, wisdom, or simply an example of how one can live consciously. In every act of refusal to participate in the collective dream lies an act of creation, of oneself, one's life, one's meaning. So we return to the question we began with. Why do spiritually awakened people quietly disappear from society? Now the answer is obvious. Because awakening is incompatible with the collective dream. Because expanded consciousness cannot fit into the narrow framework of social conventions. Because a soul that has met its own depth can no longer pretend that superficial games satisfy it. This is not weakness, not escapism, not fear of the world. This is a necessary stage of transformation that Jung called sacred solitude. In this solitude, a person meets themselves with archetypes, with the unconscious, with God. Call it what you will. And in this meeting, they find what no society can give: wholeness. The philosophical conclusion is simple yet profound. Disappear from society to appear to yourself. Die as a collective function to be born as an individual. The question that remains with you: are you ready to pay this price? Are you ready to accept loneliness, misunderstanding, alienation in order to become who you truly are? Jung said that not everyone is called to individuation, but those who have heard this call cannot ignore it. They are destined for an inward journey, even if it frightens them. Think about this. Look within yourself. Ask, who am I beyond all the masks? And if the answer frightens you, then you are on the right path. If this video resonated with you, if you recognized your own experience in these words, like and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with those who are also experiencing spiritual awakening and need understanding. Together, we create a space where depth is valued above the surface, where solitude is recognized not as an illness, but as a path to wholeness. Thank you for being with me through the end of this journey.